A lot of students struggle to balance their social life with their work life and academics and not get drained. So this is my personal approach to maintaining my social life while at the same time not sacrificing anything on the academic side. The first thing is to increase how much time you get to spend with your friends. You need to find a better way to study, AKA faster. And I have several videos on this, so if you want to know how I do this and my approach, then you can just go watch that. The second thing is how you plan your day in terms of scheduling academics and scheduling social life. So one thing that I see a lot is that people don't schedule social time. Most of the time people will be like, okay, if I finished all of my academics, then I can go hang out with my friends. And I personally find that this is a ridiculous approach, because what happens is that I'll end up doing, like, if this is my day, right? Like, this is a time block in a calendar. We start at like midnight and we go to like 11:59. Okay, and I wake up at like 4, and then I have practice until like 7, and then I get back at like 8. Okay, and then I have the rest of the day to, like, let's say this is lecture, this is study time that I've blocked out, and then it's like, okay, with the rest of this time here, I'll just see my friends. Well, what happens is that because I have so much time, this study block, it starts extending down. Why does it extend down? Well, there's something called Parkinson's law, which basically states that the work will expand to fill the time allotted towards it, which basically means that if you have more time, however long something is going to take, so let's say that it was only me studying X amount of chapters of a textbook or lecture material, if it would only take this long and I have this long, then it will expand to fill that time. So what I've found to be incredibly effective in mitigating this effect and actually leveraging Parkinson's law to my advantage to have more time, I pretty much only use my calendar to block out my free time. And then in the extra, that's where I put the study. So I actually do the reverse. And the reason I know this works, well, one, I've tested it, but two, it makes sense when I started because the work needs to get done anyway. So you're going to be stressed about not doing the work if you don't get it done. But what happens is if this is social time, then this is no longer available to be bled into by that study time, which means you have to finish the work in this amount of time, or you don't get to finish it and you just go straight into socializing, because this is mandatory now, right? You have to make this a priority if you want to be able to balance both. And I also think that balance is it's a tricky term, because balance implies that you're doing two things at once. I like to think of it as contrast. So if you're studying, right, if you're studying in the library with your friends, I think that's a little ridiculous. One, you're not giving your friends your full attention, so you're actually not being a very good friend. Two, you're not getting as much done studying, which is the one that most people think of. But I think on the social side too, it's much more polite to not have your attention being drawn away when you're trying to talk to somebody. And also, it's not as fun. Why would you want to hang out with your friends in the library? It's a very boring place to go if you're trying to hang out with your friends. So just finish your work, leave the library, go do something fun, and give people your full attention. And people will enjoy being around you more, because if you only see them in the library, they're going to associate you with work. And they also associate work with hatred and burnout and frustration. And you don't want the brain to make those links in their head. You don't want them to associate those things with you, because that's what's going to start happening. And then they're not going to want to see you, because they're not going to want to go to the library. And if you only see them in the library, they're not going to want to see you. So this is how I would approach that aspect of it. The next thing, calendars versus to-do lists. You might be asking, Simon, if you schedule only socializing, how do you get anything done? How do you know what to do? You might think, okay, Simon, he uses the calendar for his socializing. Yes, I do. But I also barely use calendars. So, I kind of just know at this point, like in my head, what's going to happen when, just because I kind of like to keep my routine the same, as similar as possible from day to day. So I don't have to switch it up. I don't have to do a lot of thinking. In terms of like being more efficient in life, the fewer decisions that you have to make on a daily basis, the more you're going to be able to do. Because you're going to know the routine, you're going to run on autopilot, and you save a lot of mental energy that you can spend socializing, or you can spend on your academics to actually be more locked in when you're sitting down and more focused. So I rarely use calendars, but if you're going to use a calendar, use it for socializing. For the to-do list, this is what I find to be much more effective. How do I do this? This is my approach that I found that works really well, especially because I have ADHD and I can't think of a lot of things at once. I like to think of one thing at a time and then finish it and then move down the list, because multitasking doesn't exist. And yeah, you can debate me on that all you want, but it doesn't. It's just much faster to do one thing, to finish it. If it's the most important thing too, there's technically, by definition, no better use of your time. So this is how I make my to-do list. I have 2 sections. The first section here, this is the need to-dos. The next section here is the want to-dos. Everything in the need to-do section absolutely must be done by the end of the day. You don't get to go to bed without doing it. So I never like to put more than 3 things on this list. And the reason for this, so if it comes to 4, it just means you procrastinated too much, and that's your fault. You should watch my video on procrastination and how to deal with that. And you're pretty much just gonna put this in order of importance. So this is gonna be the most important. And important can mean either pressing, or it could mean that it's worth the most, and in terms of your grade. If you don't finish everything on the need to do list, it's not the end of the world, but it would basically be like turning in an assignment late. Like, there are negative consequences, like real negative consequences, to not finishing this on time. And this one's gonna be the least important. This would be something like if you had a 20% assignment that took a long time, you'd work on that for pretty much, as much as you could do. If you don't end up finishing it, then, this one could be like a 10% assignment, and this one could be like a 5% assignment. So like, these 2 aren't gonna have as big of an impact as that 20%. Then the want to-dos. This is everything work-related that you want to do to get done by the end of the day. So for me, this would look something like maybe start working on another project, maybe draft an essay. Actually, I wouldn't do the full essay. I would probably just draft like intro paragraph. Stuff like that. Things that don't necessarily need to be done today, but things that I would like to get done to start the ball rolling on future things, so I don't end up having more than 3 other things per day. Now, this is a pretty extreme example. You wouldn't want to have 3 full projects due on the same day, especially if you haven't started them. But yeah, this is kind of how I'd structure that. And here, the most important thing is the most important thing. A lot of you might have some stress about working on one thing until completion. And here's my response to this. So if you spend time on the most important thing, right? By definition, there's nothing better you can work on. Even if you don't finish it, there is no better use of your time. And so whether you get to these or not, it was always better to spend your time on the thing that you spent your time on, because it's more important. So it doesn't matter. No matter how stressed you are, if you don't finish this, like it's not, you did the best you could. You couldn't have done anything better. And next time, in terms of like the work that you did for that day, but next time just leave more time so that you have, you're able to finish everything on the list. So that is the to-do list. I love to-do lists, and I pretty much rewrite it every single day. I don't, I have a few things that repeat, and I'll usually put them at the top here. So I would have like my flashcards. This would be like the reviews that I have to do. Reviews plus new cards. For example, reviews are however many I have to do on that day. There's an algorithm in Anki. Anki's a free software that I use to make all my online flashcards. And it will just tell me how much I need to do, and I just study them, whatever it tells me to do. And the new cards, I do 50 new cards per day per class. So I have 4 classes right now. That would be 200 new cards per day. The reviews would probably be anywhere from like 2 to 2.5 times as many new cards as you're doing per day, although it doesn't always end up being a full 200, just because I don't make that many flashcards per lecture, and I only have lecture once a week. So it can be anywhere from like maybe 30 new cards per day. If I want to space it out a little bit more. But otherwise, I'll just finish early. I'll finish that in like 4 days, and then I'll just have 3 days of only review until the next lecture. So that's what would be here. Like, that's the thing that it doesn't even, like, that has to happen before the need to do's. It's like, it's the studying that will allow me to not fail my final. So nothing is going to be worth more than the final, but I need to, make this a priority here, because otherwise this stuff's going to get done and I will have done no review for the final, because it's not pressing until the end and you don't want to cram. So That's the to-do list. This is how I manage my work-life balance, and I like to think of it not as balance, but more as contrast. Schedule your social time, make the to-do list, and in the study free time that you would have here, so this would now be your free time, you just work on the most important thing for however much time you have. And it takes a lot of the stress off because you only need to focus on one thing at once, and you're not going to be running around having a billion things in your head. And sometimes if you don't complete this, the want to do's, over time, they're going to get more and more pressing. And then you just move them, you keep them on the to-do list. So let's say you only finish these 3. Like I do this in my iCloud notes, and I'll just like delete it, as I go through them. And then, I just, if this carries over, I'll leave it for the next day and write 3 more need to do's. But eventually these will become important enough to where they just become need to do's as well. So I move them up the list, and then I'll start writing more things underneath. So maybe this would become 2, and this would become number 3 one day, and then I can just write 2 more, 3 more. It really doesn't matter how many want to do's you have, but I usually try to have no more than 2. So no more than 5 in total, because it's just a lot, right? Like you want to hang out with friends. You don't want to spend your whole life in the library. But this is how I organize it. But there are other ways to increase the amount of socializing that you can do that don't have to be blocked out. But let's say I wanted to have dinner here. This is dinner time. Dinner, I can eat with friends. And a very common problem that I found with eating with people is that I'll just eat longer. And sometimes I don't have more time, right? You never ever want to cut into sleep time, just because then everything else becomes worse. Your whole life gets worse. And I could go off on sleep, but I'm not going to. So if you don't want to eat longer, and let's say you had like breakfast here, but then you had a lecture too. So this would be like breakfast, and then this would be like lecture time. And then in here you'd have lunch before your social time, or maybe you'd have lunch here, and then you'd have another lecture, right? Just set timers. It's one of the easiest things that you can do to remind yourself that you have to be somewhere. So I usually set something 30 minutes before I have to be somewhere, and then 15 minutes before I have to be somewhere if I plan to eat with people. And yeah, it's a little weird at first. They kind of look at you like, oh, okay, this guy's like setting a timer. But they get used to it, and if they're truly your friends, then they won't care what you do, because they'll like you for who you are. So yes, work-life balance in a nutshell.